Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today you're joining us as we unpack a story that feels more like a Hollywood thriller than a chapter in recent business history. The unbelievable saga of Theranos.
It really is unbelievable, and what's fascinating right from the start is just the sheer scale of belief this company inspired in so many influential people.
Right.
Despite the fact that when you look back, the underlying foundation seems, well, surprisingly fragile.
Absolutely. For this deep dive, we waded through a significant amount of publicly available information. Everything from detailed news reports, intricate legal documents, to the findings of really persistent journalistic investigations, all to get to the core of what happened here.
Yeah, and our goal isn't just to lay out the timeline of events, but to really dig into the human elements. What were the motivations? What were the forces at play that allowed this to happen? And ultimately, what can you take away from this story?
Exactly. We approach this as storytellers, and this is a narrative just packed with unexpected twists and turns. It's fundamentally about the individuals involved, what drove them, and the far-reaching consequences of their actions. Okay, let's unpack this.
Let's do it.
Let's go right back to the beginning, to where this whole mirage began, with a young woman at Stanford in 2002, Elizabeth Holmes.
It's important to note her ambition even then, in those early years. She wasn't just, going through the motions of university life.
Yeah.
She had this intense drive and almost unwavering conviction that she could genuinely change the world. Her initial concept, a real-time drug delivery patch, was incredibly ambitious right out of the gate.
A patch. That wasn't even the blood testing yet.
No, not yet. That came later. This was the first big idea. What do you think fueled that level of, early confidence?
It speaks to a powerful self-belief, doesn't it? Just a real willingness to think on a grand scale. And this ambition led her to Professor Channing Robertson.
A highly respected name in chemical engineering at Stanford.
Big deal.
Yep.
And she pitches him on this real-time cures idea.
And Professor Robertson clearly saw something significant in her, maybe a raw potential that overshadowed the sheer audacity of the idea itself.
Could be.
His decision to not only buy into her vision, but to actually become her partner, serving as Theranos' first board member, that provided her with crucial early validation.
Credibility.
Oh, totally. It's like having a scientific heavyweight immediately lend their reputation to a fledgling dream, the ultimate stamp of approval before you've even built anything substantial.
Right.
Now, her first company was indeed called Real-Time Cures, centered on this drug delivery patch. But the name felt a little functional, didn't it?
Yeah, it lacked a certain scientific weight, maybe. The shift to Theranos, a blend of therapy and diagnosis, sounded much more scientific, more in line with where they eventually went.
Even though the initial focus was still the patch, interesting how even the name change reflects a subtle repositioning. It does, and it's crucial to remember that this original core idea, the wearable patch for continuous blood monitoring and drug delivery, it faced some truly fundamental technological hurdles.
Huge hurdles. Constantly monitoring biomarkers through the skin, delivering precise drug doses in real time. That requires incredibly sophisticated miniaturization, sensors, microfluidics.
Yeah, manipulating tiny amounts of fluid.
And communication systems. None of that was really ready back then.
Exactly. The biological complexities alone are immense. Think about sensor accuracy through skin, drug stability, reliable wireless communication. The fact that this patch never actually happened, it strongly suggests the initial emphasis was more on the vision, the dream, than the practical science.
It certainly appears that way, because pretty quickly the focus shifted from the patch to blood testing via finger prick.
Right.
This is where the concept of the Edison machine comes into play. But it seems the company was still operating largely on the power of what if, rather than, demonstrable working technology.
And what's fascinating here is the pivot itself. Recognizing the limits of the patch, shifting to blood testing was maybe strategically sound. It addressed a clear market need.
Sure.
But developing a truly revolutionary and consistently accurate blood testing device from a single finger prick also presented immense scientific and engineering challenges. So the early, continued emphasis on the grand vision without robust, verifiable results that really set a pattern.
And even in those early days, well before the major funding rounds and intense media scrutiny, Elizabeth Holmes was already carefully shaping a very specific persona.
Oh yeah, Intense, hyper-focused, incredibly driven, but also almost consciously performing. Is that how you see it?
Definitely.
Yeah.
Accounts from those early years consistently describe someone incredibly deliberate in her presentation, her demeanor.
That carefully constructed image, even at that early stage, it played a significant role in how she was perceived, the trust she was able to cultivate.
Which leads us straight to the often discussed female Steve Jobs comparison.
The black turtlenecks.
The consistent black turtlenecks, the unwavering gaze, even the unusually low voice. It all seemed very intentional. A deliberate emulation of a highly successful, iconic visionary.
It's a classic example of leveraging a powerful archetype, isn't it? Steve Jobs was this cultural phenomenon, synonymous with innovation disruption.
Right.
By consciously adopting elements of his style, she was tapping into a pre-existing framework of success and vision. It created an immediate impression, seriousness, revolutionary potential, even if the substance wasn't quite there yet.
And her strategy for building the company seems to have heavily favored recruiting individuals who enthusiastically bought into the dream, perhaps more so than those who might rigorously challenge the actual science.
That's a crucial dynamic, I think, surrounding ourselves primarily with believers rather than strong scientific skeptics likely created an environment where critical questioning was minimized.
Yeah, enthusiasm is great in a startup,
But a lack of thorough objective assessment, especially in healthcare, that can be incredibly perilous.
this is where Ian Gibbons comes into the picture. A biochemist who eventually became chief scientist. He seems like someone who actually did possess the necessary scientific background.
Yes, and his story becomes particularly significant and, well, tragic later on. He represented a voice of scientific reality within a company increasingly driven by aspirational rhetoric.
You can see the tension brewing already.
Absolutely. His presence likely highlighted that growing gap between the ambitious claims and the practical limitations of the tech.
Now, around this crucial early period, another key individual enters, Ramesh Sunny Balwani.
Sunny!
Initially presented as this wealthy, older, more experienced mentor figure, but their relationship quickly evolved into a closely guarded romantic partnership, and he eventually became president and COO.
And crucially, he also lacked a substantial background in the sciences. What impact do you think his arrival had?
Well, Balwani's arrival marked a significant shift, it seems. His lack of scientific expertise, combined with his intimate relationship with Holmes and his eventual powerful operational role, it likely reinforced the focus on the vision, not the science.
And maybe further contributed to suppressing critical scientific inquiry.
Seems likely. The initial mentor dynamic quickly transformed into something much more influential and ultimately controlling within the organization.
And almost immediately, an intensely secretive culture was implemented.
Right away, employees deliberately siloed, strict non-disclosure agreements rigorously enforced. Sound like a highly controlled environment.
Extreme secrecy in any scientific or tech endeavor should raise immediate red flags, shouldn't it? Openness, peer review, collaboration, those are fundamental.
Absolutely.
So the immediate pervasive implementation of such a restrictive culture, it strongly suggests a deliberate attempt to tightly control information flow and potentially conceal the true state of the technology from everyone.
And remarkably, despite all of this, the lack of a truly functional product, this intense secrecy, Theranos was still able to secure early patents and make incredibly significant promises to potential investors.
It's quite a disconnect, isn't it, between the reality and the outward projections?
Totally.
It really underscores the immense power of a compelling narrative and the perceived potential for groundbreaking innovation. Patents, even without a fully realized product, can create an illusion of advancement.
And Holmes's promises, fueled by her charisma and the company's image, were evidently persuasive enough to attract significant early capital.
Which brings us to the initial demonstrations of the Edison machine to those investors.
Ah yes, the demos.
It sounds as though these early showcases were carefully staged, creating a misleading impression of the device's capabilities.
Yeah, reports suggest they were meticulously orchestrated, fabricating a false sense of readiness. The practice of running actual blood tests on conventional established lab equipment in back rooms.
While showcasing the Edison up front as the revolutionary device doing the analysis.
Exactly. It's a significant indicator of a deliberate effort to mislead key stakeholders right from the start.
So if the technology wasn't ready, why present it as if it were?
That's the core question, isn't it? It suggests the foundation wasn't solid tech, but rather a captivating story. a meticulously constructed illusion of progress.
And that illusion, as we'll see, proved incredibly effective for a while.
It was fueled by powerful storytelling. Holmes's ability to tap into that deep desire to revolutionize healthcare, empower patients. The anecdote she often shared about her uncle's death.
Which is never independently verified, right?
Correct. But it was incredibly impactful. How do personal stories like that sway investment decisions, even in supposedly objective fields?
Oh, they're exceptionally potent, especially around themes like loss, life-saving innovation. Regardless of the accuracy, the sentiment clearly resonated, created an emotional connection to the vision.
And instead of adhering to the scientific process, peer-reviewed studies published data.
Right, the standard stuff.
Theranos chose to heavily prioritize public relations, carefully managed media appearances, cultivating mystique over providing evidence.
Why do you think they chose that path? It's such a deviation.
Well, peer review means independent validation, transparency, accountability. By prioritizing PR, they were essentially asking for a huge leap of faith. Trust us without the proof.
And the allure of the disruptor narrative, especially in Silicon Valley, can sometimes overshadow the need for actual scientific validation, unfortunately.
Definitely. And the Edison machine itself, outwardly presenting this image of sleek, revolutionary tech.
But internally, the reality was reportedly very different, very flawed.
Precisely. That stark contrast between the elegant external design and the limited, often inconsistent internal functionality. It underscores the focus on aesthetics, on the idea of innovation rather than genuine, reliable breakthroughs.
And Holmes consistently provided assurances to doctors, major pharmaceutical companies, telling them the technology was ready, accurate, even when internal evidence suggested otherwise.
It's hard to grasp the rationale there. Was it incredibly strong conviction bordering on delusion, or was it more calculated, a deliberate disregard for the truth?
It's the central mystery, really.
To actively market and sell an idea as reality when the tech isn't developed, the risks are huge, especially in healthcare. Accuracy is everything.
And the core fingerstick miracle story, that compelling promise of a tiny blood sample replacing traditional needles, that really captured the imagination, didn't it?
Oh, absolutely. It aligned perfectly with the narrative of simplification, technological disruption.
It was brilliantly concise, incredibly compelling. Eliminate the hassle, the discomfort. It resonated deeply with patients, investors, everyone looking for revolutionary healthcare solutions.
Yeah.
That simple image became central to the Theranos myth.
And we also learned about the deliberate efforts to cultivate her image. Hiring image consultants, even voice coaches.
Right, to further enhance that female Steve Jobs persona, it almost feels like a theatrical production.
It really underscores the degree to which the external image, the narrative, were being intentionally manufactured, meticulously controlled. It goes way beyond just presenting a company and its actual tech.
Then, a significant internal shift. Sunny Balwani formally joins as COO.
And by numerous accounts, the internal atmosphere changes noticeably. Tensions rise. A palpable culture of fear takes hold.
How do you think his presence contributed?
Well, his formal integration into that powerful role undoubtedly amplified his influence. His management style, often described as highly controlling, intensely demanding, it likely played a big role in suppressing dissent, solidifying that culture of secrecy and fear.
Which probably made it even harder to address the growing technological shortcomings openly.
Exactly. But despite these internal issues, the tech limitations, Theranos managed to secure major partnership deals. Safeway, Walgreens, with ambitious plans for in-store wellness centers.
Looking back, it's remarkable. What made these established companies so willing to partner up at this stage?
Well, these deals served as huge validation points, publicly and for investors. The vision of easy blood testing in retail stores was appealing.
But it simultaneously placed immense, ultimately unsustainable pressure on Theranos to deliver tech that just wasn't ready for prime time.
Definitely not. And then there's the board of directors. Truly noteworthy, wasn't it?
An all-star lineup. Henry Kissinger, George Shultz, Jim Mattis, Sam Nunn.
Heavy hitters. Yet almost no members with a substantive background in medicine or blood diagnostics.
What role do you think that specific board composition played?
It's critical. These individuals, highly accomplished in their fields, likely lacked the specific expertise to rigorously vet the science. They were probably heavily reliant on Holmes's assurances, the compelling narrative.
It's like the halo effect, right?
Yeah.
Their prestige created legitimacy for Theranos, even outside their expertise.
Exactly. It highlights a crucial blind spot. relying on reputation over verifiable scientific validation.
So you put it all together, the funding, the PR, the sleek Edison, the big partnerships, the credentials board.
It all collectively contributed to this powerful external perception of progress, success. The myth was being constructed, piece by piece.
A meticulously crafted illusion of momentum, each component reinforcing the others. Seemingly impenetrable, incredibly persuasive.
But beneath that surface, the fundamental technological foundation was, as we now know, steadily crumbling.
And as the external myth grew, inside Theranos, things got darker. A palpable sense of paranoia, suspicion began to permeate the culture.
Yeah, the environment described by former employees paints a stark picture. Extreme suspicion, distrust, alleged surveillance of communications, tracking movements.
Definitely not typical of a healthy, innovative workplace.
Not at all. It strongly suggests a deep-seated fear of internal dissent, of the truth getting out.
And this reported deliberate division between departments, orchestrated to prevent anyone from seeing the full picture of the tech's limitations.
That sounds like a very specific, concerning strategy. Strategic siloing of information. It's a tactic for maintaining tight control.
Preventing the emergence of a complete, potentially damaging picture.
Right. By ensuring no single employee or department knew everything, both the claims and the shortcomings, Holmes and Bolwani could more effectively manage the internal narrative, suppressed dissenting voices.
And we heard about strict NDAs being aggressively enforced, measures taken to actively silence employees who raised concerns or asked critical questions.
What kind of impact does that oppressive environment have, especially in healthcare?
Well, it undoubtedly created a climate of significant fear. Employees would understandably be afraid to speak up, even with serious ethical or scientific concerns about accuracy, reliability.
It's incredibly damaging. Stifles innovation, critical thinking.
Yeah.
But in a healthcare company,
Right.
where patient well-being is directly at stake, it's particularly dangerous.
And the story of Ian Gibbons, the chief scientist, is just so poignant and ultimately tragic.
Yeah.
He apparently understood the flawed nature of the tech, faced immense pressure, then came the subpoena for a deposition. It's a truly heartbreaking sequence.
His experience is a stark, deeply troubling reminder of the profound human cost here. A dedicated scientist caught between professional integrity and immense company pressure. His tragic suicide. It underscores the immense stress, the ethical conflict people must have felt.
Then we have Tyler Schultz joining, grandson of board member George Schultz.
Right. Comes in optimistic,
Yeah.
but quickly starts questioning the lab work's accuracy, given his own science background.
His early skepticism is pivotal. A young scientist, direct connection to the board. His concerns were a significant internal challenge to the narrative.
And his willingness to question what he saw, despite the risks, shows remarkable intellectual honesty, integrity.
And the fact that his own grandfather, the highly respected George Schultz, initially dismissed Tyler's serious warnings.
That must have been incredibly difficult, disheartening.
What does it reveal about the power of Holmes's influence?
It's extraordinary, isn't it? Her influence even over individuals with decades of experience, presumably sound judgment. George Schultz dismissing his own grandson's well-founded concerns. It underscores how deeply the narrative had taken hold, even in the inner circles.
And it speaks to the complex, conflicted personal dynamics at play, too.
Meanwhile, outside Theranos, experts like Stanford professor John Ioannidis, biochemist Eleftherios Diamandis, they start publicly voicing concerns.
Pointing out the lack of peer-reviewed data, the lack of transparency, the warning signs were becoming visible to those with expertise.
So why did it take so long for these external critiques to gain widespread traction?
Well, these critiques from respected academics were significant. They started chipping away at credibility among experts. But the immense hype, the disruptor narrative, the high-profile endorsements, it created significant inertia.
Made it hard for early warnings to penetrate the broader public consciousness, the investment community.
Yeah, it often takes a bigger catalyst, like a major media expose, to truly shift public perception.
But Holmes, instead of addressing these growing doubts with transparency, with data, she seemed to double down.
Yeah, more confident public appearances, projecting unwavering success.
What motivates that kind of response in the face of mounting skepticism?
It could suggest a deep-seated, maybe even pathological belief in her own vision, or a calculated, increasingly desperate attempt to maintain control as things started unraveling, hoping sheer conviction could overcome the evidence.
It's a common pattern when people have invested so much identity, reputation in something.
And that's when the Wall Street Journal gets a crucial tip.
The moment things really start to change. the beginning of the end for the illusion.
Yeah, that tip was the critical catalyst. It set in motion the chain of events leading to the downfall, underscores the vital role of investigative journalism.
And the subsequent investigation, led by John Carey begins in earnest.
With Tyler Schultz bravely stepping forward as a key early source, providing crucial first-hand info about the tech's fundamental issues, the potential patient harm.
His willingness to speak out, despite the huge personal and potential legal risks, truly remarkable.
Carey's investigation is a powerful example of meticulous, persistent reporting. And Schultz's courage was absolutely crucial, giving Carey the first-hand accounts needed to expose the truth. His decision to go on record, even initially under an alias, shows immense integrity, ethical responsibility.
Meanwhile, behind the scenes, Sunny Balwani was reportedly employing some fairly aggressive, concerning intimidation tactics.
Trying to suppress negative info, dissuade whistleblowers.
That's what reports suggest. What does that alleged behavior tell us about the internal state at this point?
It just further underscores that entrenched culture of fear and control. The reported efforts to silence people highlight the increasing desperation to prevent the truth from emerging as external pressure mounted.
And we also learned about that rather extraordinary event, the staged, misleading lab tour for then Vice President Joe Biden.
Wow. The lengths they apparently went to, creating a false impression of a functional, advanced facility. It's almost unbelievable.
What does that kind of elaborate deception, aimed at such a high-profile figure, indicate?
It's a truly stunning example of the sheer extent of the deception. To go to such lengths, create a Potemkin village of a lab for the VP, it demonstrates remarkable audacity, a complete disregard for transparency, for truth, on a grand scale.
And then finally, John Carey's groundbreaking expose is published. Wall Street Journal, October 2015.
It must have been like a dam-breaking, unleashing a torrent of long-held doubts, concerns. What were the immediate consequences?
Well, the publication sent immediate, powerful shockwaves through Silicon Valley across the healthcare industry. It effectively shattered the Theranos myth overnight, triggered a cascade of overwhelmingly negative consequences, internal and external.
And Holmes' initial public reaction, vehement denial, dismissing the article as factual and scientifically erroneous.
Right. Her appearance on Mad Money, comparing herself to historical figures who face disbelief, it felt like a rather desperate attempt to cling to the narrative as it dissolved.
That immediate, forceful denial, those unusual comparisons, classic defensive reaction when an illusion is threatened. But the weight of evidence against her was just becoming too hard to ignore.
And internally, the cohesion just disintegrated almost immediately. A significant wave of resignations. Employees who couldn't reconcile the external claims with the internal reality they'd witnessed.
That mass exodus tells us a lot, doesn't it? Carey's article acted as a catalyst for many inside who had doubts, who saw the problems.
Yeah, the public exposure validated their concerns, gave them the impetus to leave a company whose pronouncements were so starkly at odds with their experience, and it just accelerated the decline.
Predictably, the regulatory bodies FDA, CMS began intensifying scrutiny, launching formal investigations.
What were the key findings there?
Well, the increased intense scrutiny was inevitable after the WSJ article. These investigations quickly uncovered significant, deeply concerning deficiencies in lab practices, reliability of tests, the fundamental lack of functionality of the core tech. It led to increasingly severe sanctions, restrictions.
Which ultimately led to that significant admission by Theranos, voiding 2 staggering years' worth of test results from the Edison devices.
Impacting tens of thousands of patients, the implications must have been profound.
The retraction of such a massive volume of patient results. It's a truly profound failure, and undoubtedly had potentially serious consequences for those who relied on that information for critical healthcare decisions. It starkly highlights the real-world harm from this kind of tech deception in medicine.
Unsurprisingly, major partners like Walgreens formally severed ties, initiated legal action, and Safeway, which had already quietly started distancing itself.
They must have felt vindicated. What did these broken partnerships signify?
A devastating financial and reputational blow. It signaled a complete erosion of trust in Theranos' ability to deliver, compounded the legal financial woes, made any recovery look increasingly unlikely.
Yet even facing this mounting crisis, Holmes attempted a pivot, a new device, the Mini Lab.
Felt like a last-ditch effort, didn't it? To salvage the image, demonstrate some functional tech. How realistic was that?
Well, the introduction of the Mini Lab at that late stage certainly felt like a desperate Hail Mary. trying to regain credibility, showcase something working. But by then, the reputation was so tarnished, the underlying tech issues largely unresolved. Any successful, believable pivot seemed highly improbable. Impossible, maybe.
And then came the formal indictments. Elizabeth Holmes, Sunny Balwani, serious charges, wire fraud, conspiracy to commit wire fraud.
That marked a significant shift, right? Beyond business failure into potential criminal wrongdoing.
Exactly. The indictments signified that federal authorities believed they had enough evidence to pursue criminal charges for systematically deceiving investors and patients. It elevated the stakes dramatically, transformed the narrative from corporate malfeasance to potential criminal liability.
Around this time, news of Elizabeth Holmes's secretive pregnancy became public.
Adding another layer of complexity to the legal drama. Many different interpretations arose about the timing, potential influence on public perception, legal proceedings.
Yeah, was it strategic? To elicit sympathy, delay proceedings, or just a personal event coinciding with the drama. Regardless, it added another element of public fascination.
And the subsequent criminal trial faced numerous delays. COVID, the birth of her child, various legal maneuvering.
It was a protracted period leading up to the actual start. What impact did those delays have?
Well, they prolonged the saga in the public consciousness. Each delay seemed to heighten anticipation, public scrutiny, allowed more time for public opinion to solidify, for the narrative to be further analyzed, debated in the media.
And when the trial finally kicked off in 2021, Holmes's defense strategy was notable.
Yeah, involving a significant degree of blaming, essentially turning on her former partner, Sunny Balwani.
What were the key elements there?
Portraying Balwani as this manipulative, controlling figure who exerted significant influence over her actions, it was a significant, certainly controversial tactic, an attempt to shift considerable responsibility for the alleged fraud onto her former romantic and business partner, added yet another layer of complexity, interpersonal drama.
Ultimately, though, both were found guilty in their separate trials. Holmes convicted on multiple counts of wire fraud, conspiracy to defraud investors. Balwani convicted on all charges he faced.
Bringing a definitive legal conclusion, the jury verdicts essentially validated the investigation findings, the powerful testimonies of those who spoke out against the deception.
And in 2023, Elizabeth Holmes finally began serving her 11-plus-year prison sentence. It's just a stark, almost unbelievable contrast to the visionary CEO image she cultivated just years before.
What does that ultimate outcome say about the consequences of such large-scale deception?
Well, her imprisonment is a stark, undeniably powerful illustration of the consequences, especially when it involves public health, significant financial investment. The dramatic contrast between celebrated innovator and convicted felon is a potent cautionary image.
It really makes you reflect on investor psychology. How did so many seemingly intelligent, experienced people and institutions invest such substantial sums? Despite the lack of concrete evidence, independent peer review.
What factors might have clouded their judgment?
It's fascinating and complex. It highlights the powerful influence of compelling narratives, the fear of missing out FOMO, and the human tendency to be swayed by charismatic visionary leaders, even when objective evidence is lacking.
The allure of disruptive innovation, huge returns, sometimes it overrides fundamental due diligence, objective risk assessment.
And the fundamental question that lingers for many, was it intentional, deliberate fraud? Or was there an element of genuine, misguided delusion in Holmes's own mindset? Where do you think the line lies?
That question, fraud versus delusion, is central to understanding her motivations, the whole phenomenon. It's possible her intense ambition, her desire for success, blurred the lines between vision and objective reality.
Right.
But the significant evidence of deliberate misrepresentation, active concealment of failures, misleading statements, it strongly suggests a very substantial element of intentional deception.
So maybe a complex, unsettling interplay of both, genuine belief and calculated manipulation.
Very possibly. But ultimately, the enduring message seems to be: belief and charisma are potent forces, but they cannot substitute for fundamental science. Rigorous testing, demonstrable, verifiable results.
As the saying goes, biology doesn't operate based on how compelling your narrative is.
That's an absolutely crucial takeaway. Theranos is a powerful, cautionary reminder. Even the most compelling vision for the most charismatic leader must be grounded in empirical reality, subjected to thorough, independent validation, especially with something as critical as health and well-being.
Belief motivates, but in science and tech, it must be substantiated by solid, irrefutable evidence.
So the Theranos story, truly captivating, ultimately deeply cautionary. Unchecked ambition, the critical importance of due diligence, independent critical thinking, and the significant human cost of unchecked hype and deception.
What's really fascinating for you to consider, reflecting on this deep dive, are the broader implications. How often might we encounter seemingly revolutionary ideas in various fields that warrant much deeper scrutiny?
Yeah, where exactly is that often blurry line between visionary thinking and potentially misleading, even fraudulent narratives?
Exactly. It compels you to think critically about how we evaluate innovation leadership. How do we strike that crucial balance? Foster enthusiasm for bold ideas, but maintain healthy skepticism, rigorous evaluation. It's an important question in all aspects of life.
It certainly is. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the complex and ultimately cautionary tale of Theranos.
And thank you for engaging with this fascinating story. We hope it's given you some valuable insights to consider.
We certainly hope so. And now, as you go about your day, perhaps consider what other seemingly revolutionary ideas currently capturing our attention might warrant a closer, more critical look. It's a thought to carry with you until our next deep dive. Until then.